jurisdiction of the CRTC.
One specific passage from the report that might be of particular interest to us went like this.
Great content is more likely to be produced if upfront investments are made in development. However, great content will not necessarily be found unless it is promoted. The volume of content available to audiences has exploded. YouTube alone uploads some 500 hours of content every hour, while Spotify offers some 50 million songs with tens of thousands added daily. This abundance makes it challenging for Canadians to discover Canadian content. For these reasons, we agree with stakeholders who submitted that the legislative framework should also set out objectives regarding the discoverability of Canadian content.
All this background is important because it is critical that we clearly understand the underlying motive of all that has happened since. Acting on the report's recommendations, in 2020, the Trudeau government introduced Bill C-10, a piece of legislation that would finally amend the Broadcasting Act to give the CRTC jurisdiction over the internet. For boring parliamentary procedural reasons, in February of 2022, Bill C-10 had to be reintroduced as Bill C-11, and this is the bill we have been arguing over ever since. Among a lot of other stuff, the big thing that the bill aspires to do, and something that the Trudeau administration has been very clear in stating that they want it to do, is force any major streaming platforms operating in Canada to showcase more great Canadian content at the expense of bad foreign content. This will in turn help make Canadian users of those platforms watch more great Canadian content and less foreign content, which, to quote one of the Trudeau government's favorite catchphrases, is seen as an essential way to safeguard Canada's cultural sovereignty. Now, Bill C-11 has proven a very controversial project, clearly much more controversial than the Trudeau administration anticipated. The first chamber of the Canadian Parliament, the House of Commons, debated the bill for almost 5 months before finally passing it in late June. The Canadian Senate then subjected it to what has been described as the longest ever study of any piece of legislation in Senate history, holding 31 different committee meetings with 138 different witnesses, including me. Now, for those who don't know, the Canadian Senate, which is not elected, is notorious for being a bit of a rubber stamp on proposed laws. So for them to care this much reflects just how contentious this legislation has become. The Senate has now offered 26 amendments to the bill, which will have to be considered by the House of Commons before it gets final approval, which is unto itself pretty unusual. Proposing amendments to legislation is basically the only substantial thing the Senate ever does in the Canadian system, and even then, only rarely. Of the 262 bills passed during Prime Minister Trudeau's time in power, C-11 will be only his 24th to face proposed amendments from the Senate. The fact that the politicians have been slow-walking this bill is particularly reflective of the amount of opposition to it that has been generated by many Canadian online content creators. This site has been ground zero for much of this, in part because many Canadian YouTubers believe that they have the most to lose from this legislation. YouTubers mostly make money from ad revenue, which correlates to how many people watch our videos. So if implementing C-11's patriotic agenda in any way makes it harder for audiences to find or see our videos, that is potentially less money in our pockets. YouTube itself also makes money from the ad revenue generated from videos, so their bottom line faces potential threat from C-11 as well, which is why they've recently begun mounting an aggressive anti-C-11 propaganda campaign of their own, both to individual Canadian creators and the Canadian public at large. If you have been to a big Canadian city recently, you might have seen some of the big anti-C-11 billboards YouTube has been putting up everywhere. Which brings us to the video YouTube versus Canada by A Dose of Buckley. So Buckley is a Canadian opinion commentary guy who mostly makes what I would describe as angry talk radio style monologues about current events.
In fact, there's plenty to suggest that he doesn't even really want Twitter, that this whole thing's a pump and dump scheme, or more pettiness to just try and destroy a company that he thinks wronged him in some way.
He actually reminds me a lot of some of the guys I used to listen to on the radio when I was first getting into politics. Even though he doesn't appear on camera himself, he is very good at drawing you in with the confident and charismatic way that he speaks. I haven't watched enough of his stuff to have a super clear understanding of his politics, but I would say he aspires to be a blunt voice of nonpartisan sanity in a crazy, polarized world. His C11 video certainly seems motivated by this mindset. He views all of this speaking out against C11 as a bit hysterical, and is especially incensed that YouTube proper is making such a fuss about it. He does repeatedly emphasize that he does not personally support the bill on philosophic grounds.
And let's just start this off by saying that I don't support it. Can I do that so I can throw this in your face later? I don't support it. I think every government should pretty well piss right off when it comes to trying to regulate online spaces.
But the purpose of his video is more to expose the flaws of the bill's critics. So he's not pro-C11 as much as he's anti-C11. A big part of Buckley's argument is something that I have heard quite a few times from both C11 supporters and anti-anti types alike, which is basically that YouTube's public awareness campaign against C11 is extremely disingenuous and hypocritical. In their ads, YouTube has warned that Bill C11 will make it harder for Canadians to discover videos that they want to watch, potentially subject the videos of Canadian creators to arbitrary suppression, and hurt the bottom line of those creators. And Buckley responds by basically saying, "Oh, that's rich coming from you, YouTube."
First off, since when the did you care about me being able to build a sustainable business, as you constantly let the labels raw dog me for fun while ignoring fair use laws? Keep YouTube yours? When was it mine to begin with, Suze? When you were showing me videos called "Making the Stinkiest Chemical Known to Man"? When you were showing my videos to like a quarter of my actual subscribers instead of, oh, I don't know, all of them? Or when you were letting the labels block my videos without so much as a an email? If this is what mine looks like, Canada can have it.
My rebuttal to this is basically that I just think hypocrisy is kind of overrated as a vice. Even if we accept the premise that YouTube screws creators in all sorts of ways by suppressing the popularity or discoverability or profitability of their videos, I don't think that that should lessen our skepticism of how government would use those same powers. Buckley has a bit of an exasperated, well, how much worse could it get tone, and I'm just willing to say I think it could, in fact, get a lot worse. So, full disclosure here, during the course of my advocacy on this issue, I have met with YouTube people several times and had meaningful conversations with them. Politics is all about forming alliances and coalitions, and I personally feel like this is an issue where my interests as a business and YouTube's interests as a business are clearly aligned, even though they might deviate elsewhere. YouTube is sort of like my boss, and I do think that with any employer, it is important to be able to distinguish your personal interests as an employee from the broader existential interests of your employer as a thing that you obviously want to see thrive and survive. Regarding the substance of Bill C11 itself, I think that Buckley's contrarianism perhaps makes him a little bit too credulous about some of the bill's language.
This is from the most recent draft of the bill. This enactment amends the Broadcasting Act to, among other things, A. Add online undertakings for the transmission or retransmissions of programs over the internet, as a distinct class of broadcasting undertakings. And B. Specify that the Act does not apply in respect of programs uploaded to an online undertaking that provides a social media service by a user of the service, unless the programs are prescribed by regulation. So, right off the bat, it does not apply to shit uploaded by users. A dose of Buckley does not have to adhere to the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission.
Now, what Buckley is reading here is actually just part of the bill's summary on the Parliament of Canada website and not from the text of the bill. But this isn't a very big dunk because there is in fact very similar text that appears later in the bill. But what matters most is that last little part of the bit that he read.
Unless the programs are prescribed by regulation.
In the actual text of the bill, right after this bit, there is a clause explicitly titled Regulations, which says that government can consider regulating user-uploaded programs after considering the extent to which a program uploaded to an online undertaking that provides a social media service directly or indirectly generates revenues, which would include the content of professional YouTubers like Buckley and me who make a living from YouTube ad revenue. This clause, 4.2, has been at the core of a lot of the controversy with the bill. precisely because it seems to contradict the government's various public assurances that user-generated content will not be targeted by the CRTC once they gain their new powers. But the CRTC has not denied that it interprets Clause 4.2 in this worrisome way. In a briefing to the Senate, the CRTC's lawyers said that they believe